Welcome to the Vets Talking Pets podcast. From scales to tails, real talk with real vets. No pet subject is off limits. With your hosts, Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. Hello, welcome back. In our last couple of podcasts, we discussed the things to consider before getting a pet. And thinking about which pet's best for you, your own lifestyle, the pros and cons of all sorts of different species. So obviously the next step is thinking about where you're going to actually get that pet from. It's a very exciting time, isn't it, Vanessa?
It is, that long anticipated new pet arrival. So that eagerness particularly from children who may have been begging and longing for a pet for weeks, months, years, and finally mum and dad have said yes, you can get that kitten or puppy.
And particularly not getting it at Christmas, though, we have to remind people.
Yeah, really important to stress that, isn't it?
It is. Not get it at a busy time, really, I suppose, and not as a surprise present. But there are lots of things, really, that you do need to think about in terms of where you're going to get it from and exactly what type of individual pet you're going to get. And one thing that I think is worth remembering, particularly if you've had a pet and you've sadly lost them and you're going to get another one, is I think it's a good idea not to get a pet that's exactly the same. You might want to get the same species, like the same or even same breed, but I think choosing one that looks exactly the same can be a bit tricky, can't it?
Can, and it could be fraught with upset, really, particularly if that animal actually isn't the same as your previous loved pet.
Yeah, they're all individuals, and I certainly have had experience where a client desperately searched for a dog with slightly unusual markings to get one exactly the same as the previous one, and then was sort of disappointed in the dog because it wasn't exactly the same, and that's always seemed really, really sad. Even with clones, they're not the same. You know, although they're genetically the same, they've had a different environmental influence, and so even they're not the same. So I always think it's quite good to get one that's perhaps a different colour or, you know, even different breed.
Yeah, and I suppose it is its personal preference, isn't it, in terms of what people feel that they would like to take on after losing a pet, because I know we'll probably talk about in another podcast losing a pet, because actually it's a really, really sad time. But whether you're a first-time pet owner or you've just lost a pet and you want to get a new animal, then actually thinking about how you move on in that situation and what animal you get, or what do you go for. So we talked about different species in the last podcast and the research that you need around finding the right species, but it also then goes on to, where do you acquire the animal from, and actually what do you want in that individual pet. So you've chosen your species, you've decided you want a dog, you want a cat. Yes, you don't do some research, I think, is we're gonna talk about as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I know it is an emotional purchase or acquisition, but it's really important that you think about exactly what you want and do your research before you actually delve into actually getting it. And there are certainly things that you need to think about. Obviously breed, and we're going to talk about breeds for each species in other podcasts, because it's a massive topic, particularly something like a dog, which breed you choose. But even beyond that, there are other things like what age, I suppose.
Yeah, do you want to get a puppy or a kitten? Are you interested in starting your pet off right from the beginning, or are you able to take on an older pet? Maybe your lifestyle is such that actually for you want to take on an older cat, and maybe you've got a health condition yourself that you would like to, say for example you're diabetic, you might want to take on an older diabetic cat or something like that with already having a health condition. So
there are so many animals that need a good home, and obviously we've both worked in the charity sector and we realise how many there are, and on the whole the younger animals, the puppies and the kittens, get homes more easily, but also
and they do, don't they, though? That's right, they're grabbed up. Everybody understandably, I suppose,
Yeah.
but those kittens fly out the door, puppies fly out the door. There's waiting lists for them because everybody wants a cute looking kitten or puppy, which maybe isn't necessarily always the right choice for everybody, is it? So
I think particularly just, for example, an older person, if they're a bit unsteady on their feet, then perhaps having a kitten that they might trip over, you
flying
know,
around, breaking ornaments, climbing
yes,
curtains.
and actually having a more sort of settled adult cat that will sit on the lap may be better. But also, I think we both understand the thrill of
Oh,
having a new kitten or a new puppy, and the excitement. And obviously, I think particularly with dogs, you can train them and you can bring them up really to fit in with your lifestyle and to make sure that they're properly
but they
socialised.
are hard work, though. I'm just going to drop that in there because
Yes,
puppies and kittens are hard work. They
yeah,
really, really are.
they are so much harder than taking on an adult cat. I mean, obviously, you took on the lovely Stanley as a puppy, didn't you? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Toilet training a terrier cross was something not straightforward, should we say. It was at times like that I'd wished maybe I'd got a Labrador because yeah, he's been a little bit tricky. We got there in the end, but certainly, yes, you don't want to be somebody that's particularly overly house proud, I would say, if you've got a puppy necessarily. You've got to prepare for accidents.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
And even with a kitten, which I think is probably a bit less work than a puppy, but you still have to be able to, if you're working, you still have to be able to get home to feed them more times a day than you would with an older cat. And playing with them, socialising them, etc. I've mainly taken on adult cats, but I did have a couple of kittens I took on, and they were quite young, 5 weeks old, that had been dumped to the vet practice, and yeah, it was a bit of work. I mean, it did mean they were really cuddly cats and good at being handled when they were older, because I'd handle them a lot when they were very small. But it's definitely more work.
yeah, my first two rescue kittens I took on, they were 4 months old, in a small two-bedroomed flat. But and unfortunately for them, they had quite an enclosed space because they couldn't go outdoors, or they had a brilliant life, but they would run around my apartment knocking things flying. So there were so many casualties. They knocked ironing boards over, they broke ornaments, they climbed curtains. It was a little bit of a baptism of fire, I think, for me having two kittens, because we'd always had indoor outdoor cats previously, farm cats that just, yes.
Well, I remember when I lived above the surgery when I was a young vet, and I did have a couple of cats that were predominantly indoors because I was in the flat. And at Christmas, because my flat was directly over the vet reception, they would be laughing because they'd periodically hear a thump as the cats brought the Christmas tree down,
Oh
and then
no.
they'd hear running along the hallway. So yeah, it can be quite challenging
It
with
can, but it
kittens,
is, but it's
but
fun,
fun,
really good fun.
really, really good fun. And we should remember that puppies, kittens, and ferret kits must be 8 weeks old to be sold by law. And with other mammals, obviously they should be fully weaned before you get them, and that means they've stopped, or they're not reliant on just milk from their mother, that they will eat solid food. So it's important that you're not getting them too young, or else they may end up with other types of sort of behavioural
Yeah,
problems
it's really
later
important
on.
that they stay with mum to learn those behavioural traits that mum's there to teach them. So, like with people, parents are there. They are there for a bit of a purpose, bringing up children. So with pets and animals, very much the same. That mum plays a really important part in that early life of kittens, puppies, ferrets, rabbits, etc. So important to keep them with them till 8 weeks of old, definitely.
And we've certainly found, with our experience with hand reared kittens, because working for a cat charity, often kittens were found without their mother. Unless you're careful, they end up being sort of spoilt brats, really, don't they? Because they haven't had that influence of their mother teaching them about frustration.
Yeah.
So there are some challenges about that sort of thing as well.
And where in terms of, it's really important, I suppose, that we talk about where you go to get puppies and kittens. So it's okay saying wait till they're 8 weeks of age, but how do people ensure that where they're getting their new pet from is a reputable source? What should we be looking for? Is there somewhere that we should be directing owners to, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the first thing to, I suppose, to know really is that there are some quite strict regulations about things like what pet shops now can sell. They're not allowed to sell puppies and kittens anymore. And puppies and kittens should only be sold by the actual breeder. So there shouldn't be sort of third parties that are selling them. And really, you should be, if you're getting a puppy or kitten, going to the breeder and ideally seeing the puppy or kitten with its mother.
Yeah.
And not just sort of meeting someone in a car park.
Yeah.
And they hand over a little bundle to you.
That's it. And if you can go to their home and see them, but it's actually asking, can you see mum and dad, isn't it, as well?
Yes.
Whilst we were putting this podcast together, I was thinking back to when I went to get Stanley and actually kind of the prep before we got him. Although for us, fortunately, it was somebody that we knew that had bred him. He was an accident, just to add that into the mix. But they regularly sent us photos of him and videos of when he was growing up. So when he was little, from near enough day one, to be honest, we got some older photos sent through. And they also then sent us photos of mum and dad and a sibling from a previous litter. And then when I went to collect him, mum was there and I saw some of the other siblings were still there. So it was very much that, yes, I definitely saw mum.
Yes.
And I knew dad was around, but he was in somewhere else in their house, so I didn't see him. But actually, I could be sure that mum and dad were who they were saying they were. So really key to do that.
Yeah, it's very important. And my sister, when she got her dog, she got to see them before she was actually taking the puppy. She went and saw them when they were very small. I don't think she got to meet dad, but she got video of dad because he was a show dog. But it's really important that you get to know what is the background and preferably see the parents and just sort of see the sort of place where they've grown up, because
Definitely.
The ideal scenario is that they've grown up in a normal home rather than being in sheds or even outdoor kennels. I know some are bred like that, but it's much better if they're accustomed to a domestic environment,
exactly
isn't
that,
it? Both with
sight,
puppies and kittens.
Sight, smells, sounds of that domestic environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there has been, I know, maybe going back to COVID times, there's been an opportunity for people that were maybe not necessarily above the law in terms of how they've been selling dogs and meeting in supermarket car parks and actually handing over the new puppy to the prospective new owner then. And I know of somebody who, naming no names, but has done exactly that and got a dog from the car park. And unfortunately, I think the dog does now have a few different problems, which physical health problems, and maybe a little bit more research should have been done actually where the dog was coming from to kind of prevented that. And I always worry as well as regards to like these potentially illegal overseas imports, and it's an easy opportunity to be able to hand over puppies that have come into the country illegally if we're not actually seeing where the puppies have come from and visiting them in their own home.
And often I think in those scenarios, even if people realise that it's perhaps not the animal that they thought they were going to get, they sort of feel sorry for them, and it's harder to walk away when someone's standing there in a car park. I did hear what I think is quite a funny story related to this. I don't know if it's actually true or whether it's urban myth, but it was a story that someone from a charity clinic once told me, that the client had met a man in a pub and had bought a Staffordshire Bull Terrier puppy from them, but the puppy wouldn't eat and was making weird squeaky noises, so they brought them into the vet. And lo and behold, it wasn't a staffy puppy, it was a guinea pig. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it is a lesson on you should really know what you're buying before you get it. But yeah, so remember that one before you think about getting a pet in the pub or in the car park.
Definitely, which kind of it reminds me of a story now. This is all a podcast of anecdotes, I feel. But in terms of thinking about what sex you're going to get, it can be quite difficult. And I know growing up as children, we had one bunny rabbit and we had a guinea pig, and my brother went off to a local county show with the school. I don't believe this would ever happen these days. And came home on the bus with another rabbit.
Oh no.
And told us that it was a female. And we ended up with a female at home, and the new one that he introduced was a male bunny. And well, you can imagine what happened. We ended up with a litter of rabbit kittens. So it can be difficult sometimes to sex these young rabbits, but certainly I think, yes, trying to ensure that you do get the correct sex that you're going out to get. But actually, what is your preference? Which would you go for, a male or a female? Is there a difference?
I think, there's sometimes, well, there are differences. I think with something like a cat, once they're neutered, there's probably not so much difference. But you have to think about things like, males will tend, particularly if they're unneutered, to show quite territorial behaviour, perhaps with cats spraying quite smelly urine, or dogs being quite sort of, I don't know if territorial is the right word, but and obviously if you have a female, then they may end up having offspring, and is that something that you want? And also things like, bitches come into heat and then they really want to meet a boy dog, and it can be quite challenging to actually keep things under control. With a lot of the smaller furries, like the rabbits and guinea pigs, it can be very difficult when they're small to actually determine what sex they are. Even sometimes with cats, people get it wrong. I remember having a few clients who, Phoebe the male cat and that sort of thing, where they'd sexed it wrong. So it's important to get them sexed when they're young, and double checked if people are a little bit unsure.
Yeah, and I think there's probably preference. Some people like male animals, some people like female animals, some people don't mind. There's probably different costs associated with whether you're getting a male or a female, in terms of neutering as well, so things to consider. But temperament, I'm not sure really, is temperament different within the sexes? Maybe that's something we could look into a little bit more.
Yeah, it's difficult really. I suppose with cats, I've always tended to have male cats more than female cats. I did have a female when I was very young. She was a tortoiseshell, and they are notoriously a bit feisty, which she absolutely was. And I feel from my own experience that male cats are probably a little bit softer and a little bit more cuddly, but that's not really a scientific study, just the few cats I've had in my life. Some people feel that bitches are a little bit more gentle, but obviously you can get issues like false pregnancies and things where they become quite possessive, and so a lot of it's personal preference, but I think you've got to do a little bit of research into what that might mean in terms of their care, and being very careful, particularly with the small furries, that you don't end up with what you think are two females and you've actually got one of each, because that can be really difficult. And remember that brother and sister will still mate.
They can. They don't read the book. Says you shouldn't
read the book. So thinking, oh well, I've got a male kitten and a female kitten from the same litter, they won't mate. Well, yes, I'm afraid that they will. So that's something to remember about.
So that's a whole nother podcast as
it
to
is.
Whether animals have morals, I suppose.
It is, yes, it is. And But I suppose in the wild, in something like a cat colony, it's mainly made up of female related animals, and they sort of push the juvenile males out, because I suppose that's from an evolutionary point of view to try and avoid inbreeding. But obviously we're keeping them in a slightly artificial situation, aren't we?
Yeah.
And obviously some things like many birds, it's very difficult to sex them unless their physical appearance, their colours are different, which they are in some birds.
Yeah, but really tricky.
A lot of the big parrots, you need to actually get an expert to do that sexing for them. And I suppose, talking about experts, we're not experts on a lot of exotic pets.
No, really not.
We're really not. So if you're thinking of getting an exotic pet, then I think you really want to get expert advice about which species, what age is appropriate, what sex, how can you sex them, etc. And you really want to go, perhaps to a specialist vet or something.
Yeah, so
like
ensuring that specialist vet is somewhere that you can go to if you need to. Are they accessible to you? Because I always worry that you may do the research, that's fine, but actually, is there, if that animal then becomes ill and you need to get them to the vets, can you get them to the vets easily?
Yeah.
Because as great as GP vets are, we're not all necessarily knowledgeable in all species, are we, as you said? So yeah, it adds extra pressure to us, I think, as well, if you're bringing an animal in, and sometimes
it is.
Feel that we can't necessarily help, which is not the place you want to be in.
No, not at all. I mean, when I was first in practice, there weren't many places to refer exotic species to, so people would bring them in, but we would have to get the book out, because we weren't taught very much about reptiles or birds at vet school, other than sort of chickens. And when you're faced with something like a tortoise that isn't eating once it's woken up out of hibernation, or I once had to stomach tube a snake, it's not necessarily things that you were taught at vet school. Then it's much better that there's a lot of exotic specialists now, or certainly a lot more than there used to be.
And actually you can probably access some online information as well, support these days.
You certainly want to get to those specialists. And then I suppose another important thing is, what colour do you want?
Well, for some people that's very important. I think that takes me back to our cats protection days, where there were people that would want black and white cats because they supported Newcastle United football team. Or ginger cats because they were Wolves fans.
Yes, absolutely.
Different things dictate what colours people want to go for, so it can be important.
And we always thought it was good that all those people in Newcastle wanted the black and white cats, because statistically, black and white cats take longer to find homes for, which I think is really sad, and that's why I particularly chose to take a black and white cat when I got my last cats. Because they're sort of thought of being a bit ordinary, and so the gingers and the tabbies go much more quickly. But obviously there may be personal preference. I mean, there is some evidence, isn't there, that with cats there is some difference in temperament depending on colour.
Their colour, yes, there is, isn't there?
Yeah, the sort of tortoiseshell or ginger gene, they're meant to be more resilient, and certainly there's a reputation that they're fiery, and even like the chestnut mare or the fiery red-haired human, I suppose.
That's true.
And there has been a little bit of research, I think, that has suggested that some of the stress-related diseases, like lower urinary tract disease, is more common in black and white cats.
That's
that
right.
they're perhaps more susceptible to stress. But a lot of it is personal preference. There are some things to think about health-wise. If you have something like a white pet, then you have to be careful with exposure to sunlight, because they haven't got the pigment to protect themselves, and they can get sun-related damage to the skin, even skin cancer, can't they?
They can. So. And you can get some with white dogs, you can get the lethal gene, can't you, which unfortunately means that they may have deafness and blindness associated with colour, so they can have inherited health conditions.
Cats, particularly the blue-eyed whites, it's not an absolute, but certainly you do get more deaf white animals.
And I know, again, I'm not sure what research there is out there, but in certain breeds, particularly in dogs, you may find certain colours have slightly different behavioural temperaments, as you talked about the ginger gene earlier on. And I think seeing animals, particularly on social media, TV, out and about, going, oh, that dog's really cute because it's that colour. It may not be the right colour for you. It's a bit like saying the right breed. So I think, again, making sure you do your research into the temperament of that animal based on the breed, species, and also the colour probably is quite important.
It is, because I think certainly in some breeds where perhaps traditionally it might be like black and tan, like a Doberman, if you have the blue one, there definitely can be some genetic issues with them, and some increased risk of certain conditions. So it is really important you do your research on that sort of thing before you decide.
So we're talking about colours, pedigrees. Do we need to cover pedigrees a little bit in terms of, we've come from the charity sector where we're very much into moggies and crossbreed dogs. Unfortunately, not many crossbreed dogs exist these days, so the world has gone to selective breeding and pedigrees or purebred dogs. So probably addressing a little bit, do you want to talk about the differences between pedigrees and purebred?
Yes, I think we should, because I think people use the terms perhaps slightly incorrectly just because it's used so commonly. But what most people call a pedigree is usually a purebred animal, and that means that both parents were of whatever breed. They were both Springer Spaniels, or they were both Siamese. And pedigree really refers to the paperwork, doesn't it? It's like the family tree. So it's a case of, if they've got that history, the family history, even if it's a moggy, strictly speaking, there could be a pedigree, but it's not usually used in that context. And if you want to know the full history of the dog's family or cat, then you can get the pedigree, the paperwork. What is interesting sometimes when you look at it closely is that they can have the same sire appearing on several generations, which obviously is not good. So it doesn't necessarily mean you are getting a better pet, because particularly with perhaps breeds that are not so common, it's a limited gene pool,
there's not that many,
and then you're more likely to get genetic problems. But if you're being sold an animal that's very expensive because of its pedigree, you want to make sure you actually get that
getting the animal that you want with the paperwork.
And particularly if you were thinking of breeding from it responsibly, obviously.
Yeah, because
at a later
we'll probably
stage.
talk about this in a later, won't you? But there are certain health checks that the pedigree animals should have had. So you should be able to see that alongside the paperwork.
Yeah, genetic testing, or there's more genetic testing available now, or even tests that can be done on the parents, like looking at what their hips are like, or because obviously a lot of dogs get a problem with their hips or elbows, etc. So it's worth making sure that if any tests should have been done with the breed you're looking at, that they have actually been done, and that the tests show there is not a problem. Because I have heard of cases where people have been sold puppies being told they've had their hips checked. Yes, they have, but they weren't very good. So the result matters as well as the fact they've actually been tested.
Yeah, that result is what you need to be seeing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And trying to interpret it, because actually recently I had a friend that got a pedigree dog, and they sent me their test results before they took the puppy on from mum and dad.
Yeah.
And I was a bit like, I'm not really sure what this means. So actually, if you need someone to help you to interpret it, really important to get that done. So
very, very important. Absolutely. And someone who actually knows what those results mean. And in cats now, with pedigree cats, there's quite a lot of genetic testing that can be done.
Which is really good, actually. That's really improved the health.
It has. It's particularly with a condition called polycystic kidney disease, which is very much controlled by genes. They've really reduced the amount of that in things like Persian cats. So it's really worth finding out. And I suppose we should say, where do you find out?
Where do you go for?
Well, I suppose for dogs, probably the Kennel Club, or as I should say, the Royal Kennel Club now, that they can give you some pointers. They did have an assured breeder scheme, but that's actually been put on hold at the moment. They do have lists of breeders, but they used to have one where it was assured standards. But I think it'll be starting up again.
So hopefully that will come back.
Yeah, and for cats, it's and this is difficult to get your tongue around. It's the GCCF, which is the Governing Council of the Cat Fancy. But they have a lot of information on their website about things like genetic testing. There are different registering bodies in cats, but GCCF is the one I think that is most bothered about health and welfare, so certainly get some information from them. And I suppose the other dreaded thing we should talk about is cost.
Yeah, which it's key. Everyone must consider the cost of taking on the pet.
Not just the purchase price, is it?
It's really not. It's everything else that goes with the animal. So, and again, depending on, we talked last time about what species you get, there'll be different costs associated. But yes, those initial costs of buying your animal, you may pay a few £1,000s, for example, for a puppy. But actually, what other equipment do you need? And there's ongoing costs associated with that. So certainly decent bedding, food bowls, leads, harnesses, collars for dogs, all of those things. Cats, you might have litter, cat litter. You've got food they have to eat like we do, so that's going to be ongoing costs. Toys, an ever plentiful supply of different types of toys.
Yeah, some animals will wreck their toys.
They will.
I'm forever. My cat loves the catnip toys, one particular brand, and very quickly makes them all soggy and horrible. So I do have to replace them quite quickly, and I'm sure lots of dogs will tear up a lot of their toys.
Stanley loves a soft, squeaky toy, but he takes them outside, and they always get muddy and wet. So they have to dry off. So you need to have them on rotation as well, because animals like novel things to play with, like we do. They get bored otherwise. You need more than one for sure.
And a variety. Yeah, definitely.
Also thinking about vet fees. We're going to come on to talk about vet fees, definitely, aren't we, in a separate podcast? The
slightly scary topic of vet fees. Yes, we are. But it is something you have to think about. You have to think about, do you get pet insurance? And obviously you've got all your initial costs like vaccinations and worming, and some of that maybe have been done by the breeder, but obviously that needs to be followed up with boosters, etc. So it's a really important thing. And even things like, when you go on holiday, have you got anyone who could look after the pet, or are you going to have to use a commercial kennel or cattery? And that can be quite expensive and can add, if you're away for a fortnight, it can add quite a lot on the cost of your holiday. It really does,
and I think that's what we've always done, although we now have house sitters more recently, but always building that cost of cattery or kennels into your overall holiday cost. So you do need to really think about it.
So definitely things to bear in mind. And obviously if you've already got a pet and you're thinking about getting another, I suppose you have to think about, if they're different species, would they get on? Can you keep them separate? Have you got enough space? Have you got enough time? Are they likely to get on? Do cats need friends?
Yeah, exactly. And introducing cats and dogs together.
And there's a whole thing about how we'll talk about this at a later time about introducing pets. But I think just from the practical issue of cost and space and time, you've got to think.
I think talking about costs as well, I want to talk about food. Let's talk about size as well. So actually, if you took on a Great Dane versus if you took on a Chihuahua, so obviously your food costs would be greatly different between the two. So that is a sensible choice. Can you fit a big dog into your lifestyle? Can you afford a big dog in your lifestyle?
And things like insurance is more for bigger dogs, isn't it? And obviously there's some breed differences as well. But if you have got a giant breed, something like a Dane or a Newfoundland, they are expensive to keep.
They really are. They eat a lot of food.
So, and then if they end up being on a special food, I mean, my cat's on a special food because he's got urinary problems, and it is much more expensive than the ordinary food. So, you know, it's obviously I have him on that food when he deigns to eat it, but they're all things you have to think about.
Well, Maggie, I think that's all we've got time for today.
So until next time.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Vet Stalking Pets with Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at info@advovet.co.uk. And please join us again for our next episode. Your pets will thank you.